Nick, I don't want to talk about AI specifically just because everybody's talking about AI and it feels so, um, in this moment, it feels really overdone in so many ways. Um, I don't think it's going away by any stretch. I say I don't want to talk about AI, but AI brings something up for me that I do want to talk about. We're on the cusp of possibly technology that will alter how we do things. And it makes me think into the past about how this has happened before. We have often had technologies that come along and uh, change how we do things. The car has actually changed how we get around on the ground. You know, we're no longer horse and buggy. Writing and the printing press specifically, changed mass communication. There are these paradigm shifts, and there's two things I notice about that. One is how hard it is for so many of us as humans to see it coming, and two, how easy it is to adapt to it after it happens. Because 20 years ago, I wouldn't think, oh, I'm just going to be walking around with a supercomputer in my pocket. Yet now it's normal. And so the same human person that can't even see it coming is able to adapt to it. And it feels like there's a conversation there. I'm curious what your thoughts are on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that is a very interesting question, and I'm glad that it's AI adjacent and not directly related to AI because, like you said, it's overly saturated talking about artificial intelligence. And I don't even know what actual intelligence is or actual consciousness is, let alone artificial versions of it. So I don't even know how to begin to talk about it. But the historical aspect of this I find really interesting of like you said, hindsight gives us, we can see in hindsight the technologies that marked these paradigm shifts, that marked these tipping points, that changed every aspect of how we live our lives. And how could we have known that those were going to be the things that did that when everybody who invents anything is convinced that the thing that they invented will be that thing? They're
Right.
like, that's how you sell it. Like, this is going to completely change our entire lives. It's going to make everything so much easier. This is the technology of the future. And almost none of the things that are invented actually end up being the technology of the future or something that completely revitalizes and restructures the trajectory of what we do in our lives. But there are some that do it, like
Yep.
you were mentioning. It's interesting from a historical standpoint to look back at situations where you see inventors and you see, journalists and people writing and predicting what technologies will exist in the future and what the world will look like. And they often assert it with such confidence. Like, this is what we're going to be like. This is what's going to be the thing that changes everything. And that confidence does not translate to accuracy about what it is. But sometimes it does. And so you look back at, like Steve Jobs and the ways that he was talking about what the iPhone will do. And I was recently reading about the battle between Apple and BlackBerry, because BlackBerry was really innovative and it seemed like the technology of the future. And when Apple came out and it was potentially this BlackBerry killer, the people at BlackBerry were very dismissive of it. They were like, it's just a screen where there's no buttons. Like, people aren't going to want this. Like, that's absurd. But of course, every smartphone in everybody's pocket on Earth basically looks like the iPhone now. And so that's really fascinating, and it makes it, to me, like effectively impossible to make any sort of like accurate or confident predictions about what technologies will take hold and in what direction they will change us. good or bad. It makes me feel humble in the face of it because of the messiness and randomness and luck that played out behind us to get us to where we are. When I'm like looking at the future of what potential trajectories we could go, I feel humble in the possibilities. I just don't feel confident in making any sort of assertions, and I don't know who to trust or, like I just don't know. I don't know. Do you know? Can you tell me which technologies are for sure? That all said, though, it does seem to me this is going to go against everything that I just said because I'm about to make a prediction and an assertion. I know nothing, but I know this. It does seem like I do know this, but I don't actually know this. Don't mistake what I'm saying for an actual assertion. But it seems like.
But I assert.
I make no assertions, but I assert that the generative AI and the innovations of it over the last few years does seem like something that has already dramatically shaped our economic landscape, our world in a lot of ways. For me, as an educator working in the university system, it has had dramatic effects already. How long lasting those will be, how we will adapt, I don't know. But it seems hard to imagine that AI will not have been one of those shifting points, one of those big kind of like paradigm shifting technological advances, especially when paired with a lot of other things, which I think that also goes into the kind of the randomness of some of it. No invention exists in isolation. They are always building upon other technologies. They're always built in a social and environmental context and cultural context. And all of those things play a role in what ends up happening, what ends up gaining traction, and whether or not paradigm shifts are able to occur. But, with a whole lot of other potential technological advances happening potentially in tandem, it's just difficult, impossible to imagine what the future may hold with artificial generative AI and, things like quantum computing and things that are potentially right around the corner, things that I don't really fully understand, but smart people promise me are going to change everything. But again, that's like those confident assertions. I don't know. What? Tell me what the future holds, Dan, please.
So I think one way to look at it is really understanding the problems, like understanding what problems it's possible to solve. I think that can give a clue as to which technologies are actually disruptive. So one of the things for machine learning, as opposed to generative AI, one of the things, in my opinion, that's going to have a huge impact is the work done around protein folding, for instance. So like AlphaFold is something by Google that predicts how proteins will fold based on how they're constructed. And so understanding like why is that problem important, and then understanding what sort of trajectory we're on to solving that problem. Once you can add some of those variables up, I think you can start to make some pretty good educated guesses that, hey, this technology has the potential to be really and have a huge impact. And so that particular technology would have a huge impact on in the medical world of being able to test things at an exponentially higher rate. So if you know that being able to test how drugs or whatever interact with proteins and what the results are from that, if you're able to speed that up, then it makes sense to me that that area could see a big change. And there's understanding the problems, being able to understand the problems and understand how close we actually are to solving those problems. And that's another way that I think about quantum computing, is that quantum computing just so happens that the things that it can solve really well are in line with the things that AI needs. And so which is like tons of parallel processing, essentially. Like if you could process a huge amount of data in find solutions to complex relationships between data or among data quickly, then you can you could supercharge what even generative AI is now. And quantum computing, that's one of its strengths. The strength is being able to possibly solve mathematical problems that are up to this point not solvable at all. But then also knowing another part of knowing the problem is what are the problems, like why hasn't that happened yet? Like what are the problems they're currently working on? Because here, even if it works in theory, or even if it works, like the physical properties will allow for this based on the maths, when you're actually in the physical world, what are the issues that they're running into? So what are those problems? And understanding how, like, are those problems a complete roadblock, or are they, can you overcome them? The people who understand the problem really well, it's almost like they know the future, simply because it takes so much time for a more general audience to first understand what problem is being solved. Almost looks like the people have a predictive ability, when really they just understand that a major roadblock has just been lifted, and it's simply a matter of time before it gets just like that problem solving ability is distributed in a way that is useful to the public. I will give you a practical example for me. I guess we are kind of talking about AI, even though we're not supposed to be talking about AI. I understood at some level how difficult the game Go was for a computer to do well at.
Okay.
And the moment I saw that AlphaGo, and this was years ago now, but the moment I saw that AlphaGo was able to beat a human Go champion, that was the moment that I thought, AI is coming. AI is not a joke. Like, it's not a fad. We have found a way to get useful input out of a computer, even when it's imperfect, or even when there's not a perfect solution, or even when it's not a calculable result. Like Go, with classical computers, Go does not have a calculable result. But we have now created a computer that can handle the fact that this is not a calculable result and still give us something better than a human can give us. And that is an application that can apply to a broad range of real life situations. Because you don't have to be perfect, and you don't have to be, things don't have to be perfectly calculable. You just have to do better than humans. And if that can happen in something like Go, I could imagine a shorter trip for it happening in other areas, including real life, physical, like robots walking around and things like that.
Yeah. There's a person working on the lawn outside, so you'll be hearing that in my mic, unfortunately.
That's okay. We have AI now. Well, I can take that out.
Ooh, just move it right out.
Yeah.
Or have my mouth move to the sound of the lawnmower, so it just makes it seem like it's something I'm saying. I think that's really interesting, because I like kind of like the reversal of the issue of like looking at a problem first. And when I'm teaching my English students, and literature students, I introduce them to a term called exigency when thinking
Okay.
about genre and genre conventions, and
Yeah.
how exigency is this problem to be solved, basically a gap, a demand. Like, how are we going to tackle this? And that's in the context of writing and genres. But, the idea that every genre of literacy, very expansively, from emails to letterhead to memos to novels or whatever, that they're all tackling some sort of exigency. The conventions that have been built around that is because it's solving a problem or meeting a demand. And so when you relate it to problem solving, that's where my mind goes, and that helps me conceptualize it and think about how that can give us some sense of what might actually, not only the potential directions that technological advancement can go, but give us some sort of purchase on which ones will be more successful because they're actually tackling certain kinds of problems that are meaningful to us. But then that immediately made me think of like, who's deciding which problems to tackle and which ones are actually meaningful for us, so that it then transcends pretty quickly into value systems and
It does.
what matters to us. And different cultures and different people and individuals will have different sets of values and different sorts of problems that need to be solved. And I know that the market and economic systems can often distort or even pervert what we want or what we think we want. They're telling us this is a demand or this is a problem that needs to be solved, while people are starving and dying in the streets.
Mm-hmm.
So that's immediately where my mind goes, of like, which problems and
Mm-hmm.
and who is telling us what kinds of problems. And it
Yeah.
speaks to kind of the feedback loop. And this is
Mm-hmm.
any sort of economic system of supply and demand.
Mm-hmm.
They don't exist in a vacuum. The supply and the demand are affected by each other. And similar with problems that need to be solved, which direction technologies are going to go in attempting to tackle those problems are
Yeah,
both.
and which problems should we use profit motivated corporations to solve? Because corporations actually only have one problem. Any profit motivated corporation, the productivity of that corporation is measured by solving the problem of profit. How do you make enough money?
Right.
And so there's actually a really well defined problem for every single profit motivated corporation. It's revenue and expenses and profit margin.
Right.
And I think those are things that can be really useful to also solve human problems, but I think we just need to be really careful which problems we decide to unleash that type of mechanism on, because it really is a mechanism that has only one problem to solve, and that's profit margins. So that's because I do think there's this error that we make and it permeates Silicon Valley as it does most of our minds, and this idea of a amoral tool, something that actually exists without like somehow outside of morality. Like this is just the tool. It's not good or bad. It's not good or evil. It's just a medium. It's just the tool. And that sidesteps the issue of why we invented the tool in the first place, or the morality that brought the tool about. So you could practically say Facebook isn't good or bad, it's just a tool. But what was the moral context that Facebook developed in, exists in, and is motivated by? And that doesn't mean that people in Facebook are bad or evil if Facebook does something that's damaging or harmful. It just means that we need to be really careful about not removing any more like moral context from our own inventions, and realize that our inventions are happening in a context of our desires as humans, corporate desires as profit making structures. it can easily remove our critical thinking if we label something as just a tool as opposed to assuming that that tool exists in a moral landscape.
I love that. I think that that is an extremely good point, and um, I think that that is something that's far too often neglected, and part of why we might neglect that in the United States specifically is our adherence to that kind of like hyper individualist narrative about personal responsibility and everything like that. And I think it does serve corporations, profit driven entities, like you were saying. It serves them to sidestep that the moral context in which they are creating these things and just say that it's just a tool and what y'all do with it is not the technology's fault, it's the individual's fault because of your misuse of it or whatever, society's fault. And I think that that is a convenient way of sidestepping these complex issues. And it immediately makes me think of like the opioid crisis over the past couple decades and the ways in which pharmaceutical companies like Purdue really were very actively driving that narrative of, we created this amazing technology in OxyContin that is helping people with pain, and it's amazing. Like, imagine if you are suffering from this extreme amount of pain, and now we have this pill that can alleviate that for you and give you quality of life and all of this. The fact that some people are abusing it, that's not our problem. That's the abuser's problem. And while they say that, they are, unleashing hundreds of sales reps into doctors' office, incentivizing doctors to push these pills onto people, to overprescribe them. They're creating commercials for them. They're doing all of these things because, like you so beautifully said, their one concern, the problem that they have to solve, is profit. And so it serves them well to be able to remove the moral question and or create a moral story about who's actually responsible for the misuse of it, and say, this is just a tool, it's just a pain relieving technology, it's amazing, if you do it right there's no problem, and if you do it wrong, not our fault. And I think that that is very convenient and not actually representative of the complexity of our real life situations that are extremely complex and system oriented.
Mm-hmm. And I would suggest that can happen at a corporation even when every single individual within that corporation acts without malice. I think the exact same harm can come from a general incentive for profit, and every single person in a certain corporation may act within themselves like they are just doing their job, and they are doing that job perhaps well, and harms can still happen. Like, harm can happen without malice. We don't have to demonize the people or the corporation. I'm not going to say that it always happens this way. I just want to point out it is possible for every single person to be part of a big pharma company, and each of those people as individuals to be moral, good people, and for that company to still do harm. And we need to make sure that we somehow keep that gray in the conversation, simply because if everybody says like, this company and everybody who works for it is evil, that actually doesn't serve any that doesn't actually help anything. Because like the people who work in the company, they know they're not evil. Like, I'm not an evil person. I'm just doing my job. And like, all of a sudden, if we turn into binaries where it's like good, evil, right, wrong, everybody who works for big pharma is an evil demon, like, that is just as harmful to getting a productive result sometimes as it is to look the other way. Because once we get into the binaries, it's really hard to have the open dialogue and good conversations we need in order to reduce harm. So instead of like finding evil, if our focus is on reducing harm, and in order to do that, first measuring harm. Seems like that's a conversation that we need to keep open.
I cannot think of a better stopping point than to end on an encouragement to challenge binaries and to wade into the gray areas. I think you just said it just perfectly.
Nick, it's so good to talk to you.
It's always wonderful to see your face, Dan.
Bye.
Bye.
That's how we end. We just say bye. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, I mean, what else is there to say? You say bye. That's what we should do.
Good talk. Bye.
Bye.